want to just wrap us back into some race and ethnicity stuff. Looking back, I told you we would look a tiny bit at the census questions for race, and this is just the first two. There are more boxes than this, but every American, every person who is in the United States is asked to answer this question. And as I told you before the year 2000, you were only allowed to check one box. You could not check more than one box. And oftentimes it was the census taker who simply checked off the box for you. You didn't actually answer this yourself. In today's world, we fill out the census forms ourselves. But if you don't fill it out, a census taker will come and knock on your door and ask you these questions. And in the year, this is the form from 2020, but in the year 2000, that was the year that it changed and you could mark off one or more boxes. And it was super interesting that year to be a census taker. I had the opportunity to knock on some doors and ask people these questions. I had a little bit of anthropology in me, so I knew that in some ways these questions were goofy, right? That it didn't really correspond to what people's actual biological characteristics were, but it was still interesting to see what people would say when you asked them these questions. One of the first people, this is in Michigan, one of the first people I asked their race. And she said, well, they tell me I'm white, but I don't believe them. Now, in this census, in the 2000 census, it didn't have these little categories here. It didn't have all those things. But she was one of those things. And she said they told her she was white, but she didn't believe them. Can anybody guess what she might have been of all those six categories? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let me put it to you this way. Are there any Germans who would say they tell me I'm white, but I don't believe them? There might be. There might be a few Italians. My grandfather definitely didn't think of himself as white, but who might be most likely in that list to say, yeah, they say I'm white. I'm supposed to check that box, but I don't believe them. Yeah.
Egyptian, man.
Egyptian. Yeah, that's what she said. And in that instance, she said, I don't want to check that box. I want to check the other race box and please write in Egyptian. So I did it. So it's interesting. Again, we talked about how whiteness as a category has expanded and contracted based on what was going on. In the United States, it's generally been more expansive, as we saw in the film. The Armenians, who were once considered Asiatic Turks, got included in the white category. And so that applies to people in Northern Africa and the Middle East as well, even if those people may not see themselves as white. So that was an interesting start to my census taking. I knocked on this door and a woman answered, another person answers the door and she says, I asked the race question. And she says, well, I'm black. And I said, well, she had a son. I said, how about your son? And she said, his father's white. And so I said, well, I can mark here. I can check off white and black if you want me to. And she said, he's considered black. I said, do you want me to check off black instead? She said, his father's white. And we just kept going back and forth. But what was she saying? Remember, this is the first year that you could check off more than one box. When she said his father's white, but he's considered black, what is she saying about American society? Do you remember how we do this in America? That's the rule of what we call hypodescent. The child takes on the characteristics of what is considered socially less favorable. So it doesn't necessarily, appearance obviously does matter, but she was simply talking about how in our society, that's how we're categorized. We went back and forth a little bit, and eventually she said, let's check off both boxes. So I did. Hit another door down the road. Man answers the door, said, what race are you? He says, well, part black, part Indian. I listed about 4 other things. I said, well, what do you want me to do? Should I write all those things in? And he said, no, check off black. I stand with my black brothers and sisters. So what he was saying there, again, is a different political thing. He knows that he's many things, but he knows that it also matters in our society how we check these boxes off. So we have up here, it's really interesting what's happened with the African American and or the Jamaican box. Who gets considered in that category? We talked about the Egyptian category, but there's also these Irish and Italians. Now, for those of you who know history, Italians and Irish used to be a marked ethnicity. They weren't considered to be part of the white category. And so they would be put in their own place, you might say. And this has to do with the idea of the melting pot, how different people went from being a marked ethnic group, saying I'm Italian or I'm Irish, to an unmarked group where you just check off the white box. And maybe if you get an opportunity to you write in Irish if you happen to eat cabbage on certain days or something like that. So actually, that's a good question. Why were Italians and Irish marked? Like, what were they said to be doing that was not fitting into American society? What was marking them as different in the mainstream?
I forget the word, but not blending in.
Not blending in, yeah. So they were accused of not blending in. It wasn't, it isn't always that they didn't want to blend in, but some of them were accused of not speaking English. The Germans were also accused of this for a long time, of not fitting in, not blending in, not fitting in. But what else? Like what were they doing? What were they accused of doing? Being, yeah, they were Catholic. Catholicism had a big resonance in America, and I don't know if people realize how huge the Catholic thing was. Catholics, well, what's wrong with the Catholics, by the way? What do the Catholics do that marks them as Catholic? Yeah. Oh, yeah, they do all those saints. They're always worshiping all those saints, yes. And they were said to have too many kids. They were said to be given to crime. You may realize that some of these stereotypes are very much with us today. We just put them onto different groups. Swear the allegiance to the Pope over America. The idea was that if you were Catholic, then you had more allegiance to the Pope than you did to your country. And so John F. Kennedy was the first Catholic person elected to the presidency. And even in that election, people were like, no, he has more allegiance. He believes in the Pope. We can't have a person who has more allegiance to the Pope than they have to their country. Now, if you are Catholic, what might you do? And you're trying to blend in, you're trying to get into that mainstream. What might you do to convince people that you're part of this scene, that you don't care about the Pope so much. You're part of America. You definitely want to, yeah, you want to play up your USA-ness. Yeah. Yeah, you certainly want to play down that whole Catholic thing. Might not want to use so much garlic in your cooking. Might want to have the cabbage so much, not be so into that. I don't know. Has anybody ever seen It's a Wonderful Life? In the movie, there's a scene where the banker says to George Bailey, you don't want to be down with all those garlic eaters. And they have this scene where they have all these their goats and their multiple children. But yes, you might want to fit in. But one of the other ways that people did this is they were looking for a hero, a person they would be able to celebrate. Yes. Exactly. What do you do if you're accused of not being American enough? You bring in Columbus and you celebrate this. And so people are often confused about why the Irish are so into Columbus. What's going on there? And Columbus is a central figure in how people are said to be, okay, we have a national allegiance. We're part of this thing. We're good people here. And the funny thing about Columbus is nobody cared about him for a long time. Even in Spain, and it wasn't seen as a big deal. There wasn't a Columbus Day. There wasn't anything like that. And it was actually an allegiance of the Irish and Italians. They'd have these big parades, Knights of Columbus, fly some American flag, get some swords out there, show yourself to be part of the American tradition. So it wasn't until 1937, actually, that we had even a Columbus Day. And so it's interesting when people rename things, let us say, that you wonder why the Irish might get upset about this. And it's not because they're interested in, they hate Native Americans. It's in some ways because this was the ticket. This was how you got to be part of the country. And there they are, the Knights of Columbus, all getting excited. I get to be from somebody named Antrosio who was embarrassed about their name to just being a white guy up here teaching the class.